The United States of America features more and more in our lives as the sort of self-proclaimed leaders of the free world, particularly with this war going on in Ukraine. Is it a civilized society? Is what I want to look at. There are many definitions of a civilized society, but the one which stands out for me is to look at the way they spend their taxpayers' money. The quality of life for everybody is important, and I think most citizens would agree with this sort of list of things which you would expect from a civilized society. The first is a living wage and a basic guaranteed income for those who are unable to care for themselves. In other words, the haves take care of the have-nots. Also important, I would think, is access to free healthcare. There's free education, free public education, to allow each citizen to reach their maximum potential. Another very much in the news is the ability to walk the streets without fear. I mean, today they've just announced there have been more than 270 mass shootings in the United States this year, 2022. Access to the law would also be on the list, I think. Elections to hold politicians to account and to provide the necessities for a good life, sort of food, services, transport, and I suppose there are several others. Also on the list would be to protect the citizens from foreign aggression. A society where every citizen is treated equally, irrespective of their race or creed. And a civilized society is not just inward looking. A civilized society uses its knowledge and wealth to help those in other countries suffering through war or drought or other natural disaster, things like tsunamis, the COVID epidemic, and other endemic diseases such as malaria. Others would include climate change on the list. America seems to be very ambivalent. You know, they claim it's bad for business, but of course these humongous forest fires which they've had, destroying property and lives, has certainly focused their minds on climate change. I mean, what's the place really like? I mean, I've visited the place several times, driven across it twice for my sins. But usually on the tourist route. What's it like off the tourist route? What's it like for the average American? If there is such a thing as an average American. Well, the government's policy, the government's aim globally, is to spread liberal democracy across the world. Now, what is liberal democracy, you might ask? Well, people write books about this, and there are all sorts of different versions of it. But very simply, it's a democratic system where one man, one vote, individual rights are sort of officially recognised and protected, and the exercise of political power is limited by the rule of law. I mean, when I say one vote, I mean every 4 or 5 years, depending on the system, depending on the country, the whole lot is put up for re-election. So if you don't like them, you get rid of them and bring somebody else in. The other thing is freedom of speech. In many countries that's restricted, but in America, for the most part, you can say what you like. I mean, some of the things I don't like, swearing in particular. I mean, there's a time and place for swearing, and I can swear with the best of them. But the word the most disgusting swear word you ever hear, and you hear it on, I've heard it on mainstream TV in America, is I think it's an absolutely vile expression, and they just use it everywhere. I don't think they realise what they're saying, in fact. Anyway, let's move on. The thing that's been in the news most recently are shootings. Just have a look at that lot. So what kind of society has this liberal democracy produced in the United States in 2022? Well, let's just have a look at some statistics. The population of the United States is about 334 million, give or take a few. Now, much in the news recently is the right to carry guns, as stated in the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. This is fiercely defended by the National Rifle Association, a sort of rich and powerful right-wing group. I mean, if you're a Republican with any political ambitions, it pays to keep them on side. This is why any change to the gun laws, it's proved impossible, even after all these mass shootings. And this next little graph looks at gun sales per year. And you can see how from 2018, and this only goes up to 2020, bear in mind, they've absolutely rocketed and have gone up even higher since. The number of guns in circulation in America is 393 million. That's more than one gun per person, including children, infants, elderly. Some people must have a veritable arsenal of them. The number of houses with guns is 44%. And in 2020, 40 million guns were sold in America. Like a private army. And this next little video is of a gun show I came across in a little place called Wisdom when I was travelling across America. It was a T-junction, and there was a little cluster of houses there. I'd seen a house for miles. And when you look on the side, in the census, it has a population of 98. Anyway, down at the end of the road was a white building. On the front of it said Wisdom Community Centre, and it was packed out. There was cars everywhere. In fact, there were more cars there than there were people living in the place. So while I was waiting for some cyclists to catch up, I had to wander in. And I couldn't believe it. It was an absolute arsenal of guns and ammunition. Not just handguns, which you might expect, but semi-automatic rifles. And as much ammunition as you want. I said to the bloke who was sort of running the show behind one of these counters, I said, can anyone come in here and buy a gun? He said, yeah. He said, have you got your driver's licence? And that was it. I said, what about those at the end? These sort of semi-automatic things look like an army issue gun. Yeah, he said, you get one of those. What about ammunition? Oh, how much do you want? It was madness. And I said, is it okay if I video it? He said, yeah, that's not a problem. Anyway, This is what I saw.
Well, this is Wisdom, population 150, in the middle of nowhere, in southern Montana. And in the community building opposite is a gun show, which I'll go in and have a look at. I said a gun show, that's Wisdom, Montana. I've seen nothing like it in my life.
Over at the bar, you're not going to get there.
These are all antiques. There's an 1873 Winchester.
I know where close
They're not cheap. There's a coat.
You got a great taste, cousin.
Spare magazine.
Thank you.
There's a gunny man in the bottom. You can play cowboys and, well, play detectives. What do they work out at? Was that the price?
Yep.
They're all about $400 or $500. Wow. This is a great battery of assault rifles here.
I'm a writer and photographer from Arizona. I'm a writer, and I write about small towns. I happen to know what this is.
What size of that thing then?
He got me to come up here. The guy in the back was the etchings.
560.
So Angie, yeah.
So these are the Montana gun laws 2022. It's just a free-for-all. You don't need a state permit. You don't have to register it. There's no assault weapon law. You can have as big a magazine as you like. You don't need an owner's license. You don't need a permit for open carry. The Castle Doctrine Stand Your Ground law. I don't know what that is. As it says there, Montana is a shall issue state for citizens and lawful permanent residents who are 18 years or older. I mean, they are probably the most liberal gun laws of all the states in America, just to put it into context. And this next shot is the favoured gun of shooters. This bloke in a gun shop just holding it up. I mean, look at the weapons on the wall behind him. And in this next shot, he's talking about a semi-automatic rifle, this AR-15, which has been used in recent shootings, I have to say. Has been sold to the public since the 1960s. And the National Rifle Association estimates there are about 8 million of these semi-automatic weapons in circulation in the United States. Well, that's a disgrace. There's been a lot of shootings between the police and the ethnic minority groups, particularly the Black Caribbean groups, and who feel have been picked on. And they formed this group called the Black Lives Matter, which is, well, make your own mind up about it, you see enough about it. But these are some Black Lives Matter legally armed Black Americans. It looks like an army in some dictator-controlled country somewhere. But no, that's all legal. Well, this next little graphic looks at gun violence deaths per 100,000 people in developed economies. The list of the economies is down the left-hand side. But the thing to look at is that massive black bar leading across from the United States. It is just unbelievable. I mean, they're shooting one another on pace, this lot. That's just unbelievable. And this next, it's actually a map. Looks at which states are you're most likely to be gunned down in. And you'll notice that most of them are down in the sort of southern region. Although Wyoming stands out. Why that should be, I don't know. Although it used to feature in cowboy films a lot. That might have something to do with it. Maybe gun ownership in Wyoming is much bigger than some of the states in America. But anyway, they're obviously fond of shooting people there. I mean, we hear about shootings mass shootings in America, but there have been 3 in the news recently. The one in a school in Texas. Previous, there was one in a supermarket in Buffalo, and the latest one is in a hospital in Tulsa in Oklahoma. And the favoured weapon again in all cases was this AR-15 semi-automatic. The shooter in Tulsa, he just went into a gun shop half an hour before the shooting, bought himself one of those semi-automatics, bought himself a pistol, sent off to the hospital and assassinated a doctor who treated him. I mean, it's a madhouse. I mean, how could he walk through the streets of a place carrying one of those and the police not take notice? You know, strange place. What's not generally known is that since the shooting a couple of weeks ago, in fact the funerals have only just finished, of the school children at the school in Texas, there have been a further 28 mass shootings in the United States. That's 2 a day. You never hear about them. But this little map, the next bit, those little red dots show you mass shootings in 2021 in the United States. These are mass shootings which took place in the United States in 2021. Oh, it's frightening. This year alone, apart from the Rivalry shooting, there have been 27 incidents of school shootings in the United States. 27. And the right-wing response is to give teachers guns, allow them to carry guns around school. Well, the policy of the mad. It's an excellent sort of chart, I suppose you'd call it. Looks at the comparison of gun-related killings as a percentage of all murders in 4 countries: the United States, Canada, Australia and the United Kingdom. So this compares the gun-related killings as a percentage of all killings. 79% of killings in the United States are carried out with guns, whereas in the United Kingdom it's only 4. And this was in 2020. It's gone up a lot since in the United States. What I find disturbing about the whole business is that when this whole business is raised, and President Biden's been talking about it ever since the Uvalde mass shooting at the school, and he cannot persuade the Republican side. I mean, he is a Democrat, which is essentially what we in the United Kingdom would call a Labour Party. The Republicans are sort of right-wing, what we would call a Conservative Party. But President Biden just cannot get them to shift, despite everything that's going on. Their only answer is to give out more guns. You know, you need to issue more guns so that people can protect themselves. Well, any society that thinks like that, and goodness knows an awful lot of them, is just beyond the pale. I mean, how many guns does everybody need? I mean, suppose they've all got 10 each. Will that decrease the shooting? No, will it? It'll go through the roof if it hasn't already done so. What a funny society that is. Well, we were celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in the United Kingdom this weekend. Americans continued killing one another. There were 5 more mass shootings over the weekend. Let's have a look at healthcare. On average, America spends twice as much on healthcare than most developed Western nations. At the moment, they spend something like $4 trillion a year. It's an unbelievable sum. And this little chart just shows the comparison with other countries. This looks at healthcare. So they spend twice as much per person as the average for other wealthy countries. And it all has to be paid for privately. There's no national health service in the United States. There are vast profits to be made in healthcare in the United States, from pharmaceutical manufacture, prescriptions, consultations, hospital admissions, dental treatment, glasses, hearing aids, you name it. Every little thing will be on the bill. All healthcare is private. There is no such thing as a national health service in the United States. And you need private insurance to cover you in the event of needing to see a doctor, or needing any treatment for that matter, or for prescriptions, or giving birth, or even dying. The premiums are astronomical. For a family of 4, you're looking at $22,000 a year. And for an individual, you're looking at $7,500 a year. And of course, that only applies if you're fit and healthy. It's a bit like car insurance, you know. If you have a crash during the year you're insured, when you go to get insured the following year, the premium's absolutely leapt. So with health insurance, you know, if you've been in hospital, if you had to go and see the doctor, if you've had any treatment of any description, then you can guarantee that the premium is going to rocket. And if you have any long-term care issues, like cancerous issue, or you've had a heart attack, or you're diabetic, or any of these, and you're going to need long-term care because you're going doolally, then you'll find it very difficult for an insurance company to accept you, unless you're prepared to pay monumental sums of money. Now, if you're lucky and you've worked for a company, some companies do include health insurance as part of the sort of package they offer you. And it's a good thing to have. Now, sometimes it doesn't run for the rest of your life. You know, once you retire, it doesn't go on forever. If you start building up massive bills, then they're going to take another look at it. And they may offer to pay so much, but you have to pay the rest out of your savings. So healthcare is not a good deal. A one-day stay in hospital averages about $5,300. I mean, recently, just to give you one example, recently a chap in his sort of 50s caught COVID virus in this epidemic which they've had to go into hospital. He needed intensive care for about 3 weeks, I think it was, but he was in hospital for about 3 months. When he came out, a few days later, the bill arrived and it was over $1 million. There are some government schemes, but most medical professionals won't touch them. They're private only. I mean, Medicare covers the sort of elderly in desperate states, and Medicaid covers the very, very poor, but it's minimalistic. I mean, a friend of mine in America, he found himself delivering oxygen to nursing homes in America. He said they were absolutely appalling places. The next thing that was introduced was the Affordable Care Act, what we know as Obamacare, because it was introduced by President Obama, so that every American had access to doctors, and doctors, you know, had no way of backing out of it. It was compulsory. It was supposedly compulsory to join it. Everybody had to be in Obamacare, but you had to apply, and it wasn't free, but it was cheap compared with everywhere else. But obviously it had to be funded, it had to be paid for. The subscriptions made by the poor weren't sufficient to cover it. But the more affluent, the more wealthy in America, who are already paying for their own private insurance, either family insurance or an individual, so they're resenting this bitterly, you know. The whole mentality seemed to be, well, that's where they are, it's all their own fault. Well, some people it isn't all their own fault. You can't stop yourself from growing old. So a big split there about Obamacare. A very selfish split, I have to say. The best societies look after everybody, even those who've fallen on hard times through doing something stupid themselves. We don't realise how lucky we are. I mean, we complain about our health service, and goodness knows it's not very good, and it's getting worse. In fact, it seems to be moving more towards the American model. But in America, it's, as I say, unless you've got the money, it's tough. The percentages of people who have no medical insurance, no access to medicine at all. And it comes in different forms. It's a separate one for dentistry, and it's a separate one if you want to go and see an ophthalmist, or if you've got a problem with your ears, it's a different one for them. You know, you can get insurance cover for sort of your general health, but if you want dentistry included, that's extra. If you have an eye problem, that's extra, and it soon mounts up. And we get free vaccination, you know. They pay for it over there. Medical bankruptcy is incredibly common in America. When that bill drops through the door, everything is on it. You know, every swab, every needle, every syringe, you know, every consultation, down to the minute. So this next map looks at the uninsured rate by state. So there's the uninsured rate by state. And you notice that most of them are in the southern United States. The less wealthy parts. I mean, 17% of Texans don't have any medical insurance at all. I mean, I don't know what you do when you get ill, or if you have rabid toothache. The next thing I want to look at is obesity, fatness. There's a little graph there, it comes next, which shows you the increase in obesity since 1997 up to only 2018. It's worse now. This chart shows the obesity rates amongst adults aged 20 or over between 1997 and 2018, and they're still going up. And of course they cause a health crisis. Overweight seemed to be a major part in how seriously COVID affected you. It also plays a major part, of course, in coronary and vascular disease. It's one of the first things you notice when you get to America, just how big people are. I don't mean big, I mean massive. I mean 30% of them, that's about 100 million, are fat. And in amongst them, 10%, that's 30 million, are really fat. Absolutely gross. And if you've not experienced it before, you tend to find yourself when you first go there walking around staring at people. I mean, it's really bad manners. But some of them are just unbelievable. I mean, it's so big. You can't fly in an airplane because they're not fit in a seat. And it's because they eat too much food, too much of the wrong kind of food, and they get naff all exercise. Well, just a quick look at drug abuse. I mean, we hear about drug abuse a lot in America. It's all sort of smuggled in from South America. I mean, only recently there's a tunnel leading from Mexico to San Diego on a railway line inside it, and it was about 70 feet under the ground. There's obviously huge amounts of money in drugs in America. I mean, it's a rich country. I mean, if you're in a poor country growing drugs, then you will target a rich country. In places like Colombia and Peru and all these places that grow cocoa, they provide masses of cocaine. And it's such a profitable business, they even ship it across to Europe. And then you've got the Taliban in Afghanistan. They're going to start pumping out masses of heroin because they've been economically sanctioned. But there's big money in heroin, and they grow 90% of the stuff. But recently there have been sort of man-made opioids. So in America, the most favoured drug of all is booze. 15 million Americans are alcoholic, about 6% are alcoholics. Now that doesn't mean lying, spread eagle on the bloody pavement, bringing your insides up alcoholic. It means people who are addicted to alcohol, can't do without a drink, need a drink every day, and they may not show it. They may be perfectly capable of holding down a job and running a family, but they need a drink. Over 2 million are opioid addicts, and about 130 of those die every day. And every year there's about 200,000 new users of these drugs. And they're not confined to the sort of poor, they're not confined to poverty-stricken. I mean, cocaine is a sort of drug of choice for the rich. It's everywhere. If you go to parties or you go to any social occasion or, do you want a line? Well, no thank you, but they just offer it, like in the old days, you used to offer cigarettes. You know, a cigarette case with a load of fags in it, and you'd pass it round. Now it's a line of coke on a piece of glass. Definitely not. Well, there's about 1 million Americans hooked on heroin, and about 14,000 of them die every year as well. Well, there's been a recent change for the worse in that there are man-made opioids now. One of them, fentanyl, which you've probably heard of, is about, well, varies between 50 and 100 times stronger than heroin. And it's dirt cheap. There's so much of it about. And it's freely available everywhere. And most of it seemingly emanates from China. But you only need a tiny, tiny amount to have the same effect as a sort of 50 times larger amount of your previous opioid. So it's really easy to overdose on this stuff. And it's killing Americans all over the place. In fact, in America in 2021, there were more fentanyl deaths than people killed by guns and cars combined. That's a phenomenal number. And the authorities seem powerless to stop it. What about living accommodation? Well, there's enough of it, and as a consequence, it costs a lot of money. And the nearer the sunshine you are, the more expensive it becomes. And for some people, it's impossible. And so they end up homeless. And there are about, well, between 500,000 and 1 million people in America sleep on the street every night. I mean, for some people, they sleep on the street every night, all year round. And if you're doing that, you want to be, the further south you are, the more sunshine there is, the better. Let's just have a look at some evidence of that and some statistics about it. Now, this little map of the United States shows the numbers of homeless by state in 2019. And the one thing you'll notice is if you look at California, which is a sunshine state, you'll see there are 151,000 at least sleeping on the streets every night. The homeless numbers by state. And California has this massive number, and that's in 2019. And it's gradually getting worse and worse and worse. Whereas when you get up to the freezing cold, further north, in Washington State, say, where they have freezing cold winters, you're only looking at 21,000. So California and Sunshine States, they have a major homeless problem. And these next two photographs are just an example of what you see in every major city in the United States. And this is a familiar scene in many American cities. Hundreds of people living in shelters, many of them homemade, just living on the streets. So there you can see on the pavement there, what they call a sidewalk. A whole string under one huge tarpaulin. I mean, where do they get washed? Where do they cook? Where do they go to the toilet? I mean, it used to be called Skid Row in America. And there's another one which we'll look at. This is in downtown Los Angeles. Another one in Los Angeles. And there's streets lined with these. People have to walk past them all the time. I mean, that looks relatively tidy, that one. Usually there's junk everywhere. There are charities trying to deal with this, but I mean it's a monumental task. I mean they'll give you a free tent. What about income? You know, what about cash, money? America has the highest income inequality in the Western world. The rich are incredibly rich, and the poor are absolutely dirt poor. When we look at these, there's 4 little charts come next, showing the share of the income. These 4 charts show the share of the money. Up to 2012, so it's widening every year. It's a lot wider than that now. You can see the top 1% get about 20% of the take, whereas the bottom 50% they just get 10% of the take. And you can see there that in the European Union, the top 1% get 12%, a lot less, and the bottom 50% they get twice as much, in fact more than twice as much, at 22%. So it's not exactly an equal distribution of cash. When I talk about this with Americans, and when I visit friends in America, you know, they all talk about America's the place where you can make it big. Well, I look around America and I wonder just how many people who've arrived in America as immigrants from here, there and everywhere, just how many of them have made it big. I get the impression the chances of making it big are about the same as the chances of winning a lottery. The other thing they often say is anybody can become the President of the United States. Well, that's fantasy land. It might be true, but I have as much chance of winning the Euro millions than becoming a President of the United States. If you take the current President, President Biden, he spent on his 2020 campaign, he spent $350 million. I'll just say that again, just in case you didn't hear what I said. $350 million was spent on his campaign. That's advertising, transport, posters, flags, razzmatazz, whatever. That was the bill. And of course he didn't have that kind of money. So he has to raise it from his supporters. I mean, some of them are incredibly rich. But of course, not surprisingly, he comes with favours expected. And it's the same across the whole political spectrum, the whole arena in America. Money buys you power. And of course, it comes with favours expected. Even at the lowest level, you get this. The whole place is utterly corrupt. This brings us to education. Public education in the United States is poor. Really poor. I mean, it's like everywhere. Depends where you live, of course. But overall, comparing like with like in different countries, it's poor. Teachers are undervalued, underpaid, and they're abandoning the profession in droves. In fact, there's a whole website dedicated to teachers who've left, stating their tales of woe. I mean, the world ratings, America, let's take science, is 25th. In maths, it's even worse. It's 39th in world ratings in maths. And in reading, it's 24th. Well, for the richest country in the world, that is shocking. Canada which is next door to the United States, it's the third best rated overall education worldwide. If you take university education in the United States is very good overall. It's got 5 of the top 10 universities in the world, you know, ranking with those of us in England, comparing with Oxford and Cambridge, if not better in fact. But they cost a fortune to go to. You know, you're looking at, for these so-called Ivy League universities, you're looking at $30,000 a year just for your tuition. That doesn't cost, you know, it's not about books or, you know, IT equipment, living expenses, rent. It doesn't cover any of that at all. That's $30,000 just for the tuition. So unless you win a scholarship, they are prohibitively expensive. And I noticed in the newspaper today that the American universities are attracting the brightest of the bright from this country, particularly those who might go to Oxford or Cambridge but don't have the money. These American universities are attracting them over to America with scholarships. In other words, we'll pay your bills, which is a massive amount, which I've just mentioned. Not only that, these people will probably stay in America and they won't come back. And they're the brightest of the bright. We're not talking about sports scholarships now. You know, these are scholarships in STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, where the wealth creators are going to be, or are for that matter. The other thing I've often heard about America is the land of the free. Well, this little chart which we're looking at next is about prison populations, and America is top of the tree. Well, these are the prison statistics. And this column is particularly interesting, as is this number here. Not just in numbers, but also in how many per 100,000 they stick away in jails. If you look at the top of the third column there, America puts 737 people in jail for every 100,000 of its population. The next nearest that is Russia, which puts 615,000 in jail per 100,000. England and Wales, we are down at 148. So it's 148 in this country compared with 737 in America. And the other thing is, if you go and look at the last column right away across to the side, you see American jails at 9% of women in jail. Anyway, if you look at that chart in some detail, some interesting figures there. India, for instance. But nothing comes anywhere near the United States. If you're going to be banged up, that's where it's going to happen. Not China, not Russia, not South Africa, not Europe, the United States. "20 states retain executions as the sort of ultimate punishment. Since 1976, when execution or capital punishment was reintroduced after a 4-year lull, 1,492 citizens have been executed. I mean, admittedly, some of them for absolutely heinous crimes. And this next little chart shows the numbers of executions by state. This chart shows the number of executions in the United States from 1976 to 2021. If you look at it, most of the states are, and if you look at it, most of the states you can see are in the south of the United States. And Texas stands out by a mile. Well, the number of executions has been decreasing year on year on year, but recently there's been an increase in executions. On the 26th of April this year, Texas executed a 78-year-old man who had been on death row for 31 years. 20 of those years he'd been in solitary confinement, confined to his cell for 23 hours a day. And yesterday, on the 8th of June 2022, Arizona executed a prisoner, which was the second one in less than a month. And further executions are being looked at in South Carolina. Here's the executions in 2022. I don't know whether it includes the more recent ones. There's been at least one in Texas, 2 in Arizona in the last couple of months. But again, down in the south. And most executions are carried out by lethal injection. But other forms of execution include electrocution, a sort of electric chair, and firing squad, which is the latest one being looked at by one of the states in America. And lastly, I want to look at religion in America. America is the home of what they call mega churches. These are churches with at least 2,000 regular attenders, but I mean some of these are much bigger than that. And not only do they have a sort of massive church as a base, they also send out their message by, radio, TV, internet, and they sell numerous publications. And this next little photograph is of one of the biggest mega churches in America. You see there they get 10 million viewers on TV watching these services. And this is one of many thousand mega churches in the United States. This is one of the biggest. There are hundreds of these, each one run by a pastor. Normally the pastors just set these things up. It's like start a business. Set yourself up in a church, be a bit charismatic, and before you know where you are, you're rich. For an educated and rich society, it's surprising to find that millions of followers, who are mainly white middle class, believe this bilge, churned out 24 hours a day over radio and TV. I mean, when you switch on the radio when you're travelling across America, it's invariably some ranting evangelicals. And the further south you get, the worse it is. So these are the evangelists and the fundamentalists. Don't ask me there's obviously a subtle difference here. But for the most part, they take what the Bible says as absolutely literal. Even though it was written, goodness knows how many thousand years ago. it's literal. They believe the earth is only about 4,000 years old. They believe that God knocked it all up in about 7 days. No, 6 days, he had a day off. Don't forget that. And despite all the advances in science, technology, everywhere, they don't believe in evolution. They think evolution is a blasphemy. Well, if you try to debate this for them, I mean, once I was sitting in an airport lounge in Cuba, and this bloke with his entourage was trying to persuade this young couple about Jesus and the Bible and everything else. And I asked one of the entourage who was just sitting alongside me, you know, what about this evolution business? You know, where do you sit with this evolution? And I was asked, she opened the Bible and covered it in a great massive highlighter pen and came up with some saying. I said, yeah, but that's what they thought about, you know, 2,000 years ago. Surely you don't think it's like that now. Oh, she was absolutely insistent that it did. And eventually, out of the corner of my eye, I could see that this entourage contained what I could only describe as threatening minders. So I sort of carefully picked up my bag and moved somewhere else. But it was shocking to see. And the other thing is they're exporting this all over the world, particularly in countries where people are far more gullible. I mean, it's not the only time this has been done. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church has been doing this for years. You know, look at places like the Philippines and places in Brazil, where Roman Catholicism is deeply embedded. But if you look at the churches, cathedrals, and perhaps more importantly, if you go to the Vatican, you can see where all the wealth has gone. It certainly hasn't gone to the poor. That's another story. Sorry. The other thing I find very difficult to grasp is that these congregations, whether it be live or whether it be radio or internet or whatever, they're being absolutely fleeced by these sort of charlatans and snake oil salesmen calling themselves pastors. I mean, they do a lot of good things, don't get me wrong. You know, there are groups for looking after children and they maybe do a little bit of charitable work. But at the end of the day, it's a money-grabbing exercise, you know. These other things are just a facade, really. So the congregations are fleeced of millions of dollars. If you go on the internet, you can see it. There's a list of the top 20 pastors in America. One of them's amassed an £800 million fortune. Several of them have persuaded the congregation to buy sort of private jets at about £10 million apiece, Lear jets. And mansions, Rolls-Royce cars, Mercedes limousines, holidays in the fanciest of locations, all paid for by the congregation. I mean, one of them even persuaded his congregation not only to buy an aeroplane, a jet aircraft, but he also persuaded them to build a runway and a hangar for it. Anyway, here are just a few snippets. I'll read them out. In 2004, there, when I say there, that's a couple of pastors, man and wife, were reportedly all paid by their ministry a £10 million Learjet, several homes that cost up to $2 million apiece, a $100,000 silver Mercedes sedan, and the ministry's $20 million headquarters is outfitted with $5.7 million of furniture, including a $23,000 antique marble-topped commode. Another one. On March 11, 2020, a multi-millionaire evangelist, this was the richest of all the so-called evangelists, claimed to heal viewers of his TV show of Corona by asking them to touch the TV screen as he prayed for them. I think one of his supporters also mentioned in passing, well, injected yourself with bleach, but I won't give his name out. And the next one, 44% of white evangelists who said God would protect them from the coronavirus also said they would refuse to be vaccinated. Absolute madness. Bearing in mind this group is huge. It's fundamentalists everywhere. You know, millions of them. And of course, as a consequence of such things, I think last week the millionth American died of COVID infection. So how do they raise this money? Well, they raise it by what they call a process called tithing. It's like tithing in the old days, you know, when you gave so much of your farming produce to the vicar, or the vicar might have a field which he could rent out for a few cows on to raise some income. And this is similar, but far more subtle. The mantra they preach is, the more you give, the more likely God will look favourable on you. And they suggest a minimum contribution of about $1,000 a year. But obviously some people pay vastly more sums than that. It's often called sowing the seed, promising you that you'll get a rich harvest at the end of it. And as I said already, the top pastors are worth millions of dollars. No wonder people are setting these churches up hand over fist. I mean, there'll come a time when they'll run out of customers. I mean, such exploitation of the gullible is positively evil. You know. And if you go on the internet, you can see these charlatans at work, you know, performing miracles on stage. Garbage. Utter garbage. And that's what surprised me, is that millions of Americans just fall for it. That's a worrying thing. And as I said about the National Rifle Association, which again is a right-wing organisation, if you're a right-wing persuasion and you want to get on in politics, then you need these evangelists on side, because they will persuade their congregation to vote for you. They're so powerful. If you cross them, you're finished. So I just come to public transport. Outside the major cities, there isn't such a thing really. Public transport is seen as a sort of welfare thing. Everybody's got cars, you know, more than one car, and they expect the state or the public authorities to provide buses for shunting people around. And those with cars, they're very loath to spend money on people who can't manage, who don't have the money to have a car or cannot drive for all kinds of reasons. They're very loath to spend any of their taxes on public transport. In much the same way as they don't like spending it on health. 30 years, the United States of America has been at war somewhere in the world. I mean, sometimes it's been for humanitarian reasons, for the most part, it's because the other parties are deemed to be acting against American interests. This next little table shows you the top 10 military expenditures. And if you study the table, you'll see that the United States of America spends more than the total of the next 9 countries. Now, given that the United States of America is separated from the rest of the world by 2 huge oceans, you have to wonder why this is. Why are they spending so much on their military? Well, they have a huge armaments business. It's the biggest in the world by a mile. And they need an enemy to keep it in business. And they see themselves as the protectors of the free world. And but a cursory look at the activities of the United States since World War II, makes one wonder what their idea of a free world is. For some reason, they see Russia and China as the enemy. This is a sort of paranoia carrying on from the last century. Sort of the Korean War involving the Chinese and the Vietnam War, which was supported by the Russians. I mean, both of which didn't end well for America. In fact, 60% of the 90 plus interventions the Americans have made since World War II have ended up with Americans getting a bloody nose. The US and the UK combined have a total of over 900 overseas bases where they've got troops stationed. 900. China's got 5 and Russia's got 30. For the most part, Chinese overseas policy is to spread its influence by doing business with overseas governments, obviously for the Chinese benefit. One of the biggest is its so-called Belt and Road Initiative to link China to Europe along the Silk Road with a massive infrastructure project, to which 68 countries have signed up for this. And it's not due for completion until 2049, which will be the centenary of the formation of the Communist Chinese Republic. The only sort of thorn in the side is the unsettled business over Taiwan, which again is a relic from the 1949 Chinese Communist Party rebellion. Russia is seen as a sort of evil spawn of the former USSR. There's absolutely no evidence to support that. Russia's a completely separate entity to the USSR. And their military activity has been confined to a problem which they had with Georgia and NATO, much like Ukraine and NATO. And 4 years into the Syrian war, they were asked by the Syrian government to intervene to deal with ISIS, that sort of caliphate, carried out the most appalling atrocities in that region of the world. So the USA policy is different. They either bomb the place to bits, like in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, or they use a proxy force to sort of do the dirty work for them, such as you got in Nicaragua and Chile, and they are doing in the Yemen, and now of course it's Ukraine. I mean, this has cost hundreds of thousands of innocents' lives. I mean, just take the Vietnam War. 82,000 children were killed in Vietnam. How many in Iraq? How many in Afghanistan? How many in Ukraine? They've just given Ukraine more than the entire Russian annual defence budget. So if I was living in the United States and I was one of the living on the street, unable to get medical attention, unable to find somewhere to live, looking at the state of the infrastructure, I think that the money spent on US foreign policy could be far better spent at home. One of the most shameful incidences in recent American history is extraordinary rendition. It's state-sponsored forcible abduction in another jurisdiction and transfer to a third state for imprisonment and interrogation without legal process, such as they telling you, what you're being charged with, have you got legal representation, or are you going to get a trial? It's basically kidnapping one country and carting off to another country, not your own. A country that's going to do whatever it does as a proxy. During President Bush's war on terror, between 2001 and 2005, more than 100 people were kidnapped by the United States in such diverse places as the Philippines, Sweden, Italy, Pakistan, all over the place. And it was smuggled out of these places, not by a sort of extradition, not by a legal process. They were just bundled on an unidentifiable CIA aircraft and shipped off elsewhere. And where about elsewhere? Well, there seem to be two places. The CIA seem to have so-called black sites in, certainly in countries such as Europe. There was sort of bases or buildings where these people were detained. Or secondly, they were shipped off to countries with a sort of known record of torture. Where they were brutally tortured, about 30 of them. And the whereabouts of 35 of these people is still unknown. This is a statement by a guy called Bob Baer. He's an ex-undercover officer who worked for the CIA in the Middle East. This is what he said. If you want a serious interrogation, you send a prisoner to Jordan. If you want them to be tortured, you send them to Syria. And if you want somebody to disappear so they're never seen again, you send them to Egypt. The United States is a signatory to the 1992 United Nations Convention Against Torture. And they take the high ground. They're always raising issues about other countries using torture. breaching people's human rights. And then of course there is Guantanamo Bay. It's a US base on Cuba, of all places. And it's outside the jurisdiction of the United States. And people have been detained there for years without any access to the law at all. I mean, how can the United States claim the moral high ground when it behaves like that? Breaking international law, sending prisoners to other countries where they're tortured, detaining people without telling them what their rights are. Well, in fact, they have no rights in Cuba. So spreading US-style liberal democracy, for the most part, it's been a disaster for the United States, and it's certainly been a disaster for most of the countries involved. And the upshot of all this is, of course, that in large parts of the world, the United States is absolutely loathed. It's hugely unpopular. And of course that makes it very vulnerable to terrorist attacks, which we've seen. Horrendous. So this next photograph looks at the American dream. And for those who make it, it truly is a dream. But the vast majority don't make it. And for a sizable minority, it's not a dream, it's a nightmare. Well, that's the American dream. But how many achieve it? Well, I just want to summarise that all up. It doesn't make a very pretty picture. Violence is rife, not just in the major cities, you find it everywhere. Rented accommodation is really expensive. I mean, buying a home is beyond the realms of a sizable number of the population. Healthcare is astronomical, costs a fortune. Public education is poor. University education, very expensive. Social welfare, dreadful, absolutely awful. Public transport outside major cities, non-existent. Drug abuse, it's an epidemic. I mean, some states have legalised the growing of cannabis. Wealth inequality is the worst of all affluent countries in the world, and getting worse by the year. Well, so far we've talked about the downside of the United States, but there must be something good about it. And these are just my personal views, things which I've experienced, which I think are superb. And probably the most amazing achievement has been the global positioning system. It's absolutely magnificent. Where would we be without it? It has applications everywhere. You know, sat-nav. I mean, people of my age are sort of trundling around looking at maps, and particularly in towns and cities, I can remember it being an absolutely awful experience, whereas GPS, absolutely gobsmacking. I mean, I know it was probably developed for military purposes, but It's an amazing system. And, I mean, Google Earth is another one. Once you get on there, you can take up half your life peering at places, visiting the North Pole and the South Pole and everywhere in between, zooming in, zooming out, looking at fantastic places. The other one, of course, is Google Maps. You go to anywhere in the world and you, with that little brown chap, plunk him down on a road somewhere, and you just trundle along and gaze at distant places you have no hope of visiting. You know. And of course there's the sort of Google information channels. Again, almost everything you want to know is on there. And of course I think Google also on YouTube. You know, if you have a problem, there'll be a video somewhere on YouTube telling you how to sort it out. I mean, there is a downside to it. I mean, Google tracks what you're up to, and then they target you with all kinds of adverts about things you should be looking at. And where would we be without Amazon and eBay? I mean, they've just revolutionised the marketplace. And a sort of Meta, a new name for Facebook, and other such platforms, Skype, Zoom, where you can make contact with anybody else in the world face to face. But again, a sort of downside to Facebook, you know, they allow shocking comments to be posted anonymously by trolls. I mean, trolls are basically cowards. Causing extreme stress to those they target. And I suppose business would find it very difficult without a great many of these apps. I mean, I know very little about them. If I was younger, I might explore them a little bit more. But I do find things like Word and Excel, which have been around for donkey's years, I do find them really good.
And lastly, just a little quiz. Who is this man? This is a photograph of him taken in 2020. This is probably one of the greatest things ever to come out of America. This man is Marty Cooper, and he invented the mobile phone. It's amazing how many people don't know who he is.
I mean, there's probably lots of others. I mean, some people might have fast food, McDonald's and Subway and Kentucky Fried Chicken and whatever else comes along might be on their list. And the other thing America does have, it has the most fantastic scenery. Anyway, as they say over there, have a nice day.